since the COI report has been issued, I've been engaged in a lot of advocacy with states, both on and off the Security Council, to really flesh out, what can be done? How can we continue to raise the political cost of inaction on North Korea? And, I think what we saw is that we had this groundbreaking Commission of Inquiry report. Its methodology was wildly applauded as being unassailable. But now what? Now what do we do? How do we keep the pressure on? Because North Korea isn't like Syria. You don't have, ready access to images. Doesn't feature prominently in newscasts. So how do we keep up this pressure with this 400-plus page report? Our strategy has really been on two tracks. We mentioned the UN General Assembly, and that really has been a key avenue for us as an advocacy organization to really galvanize the voice of the international community and, send a signal that we can't afford not to do anything on North Korea any longer. So we focused a lot on, the General Assembly vote, as has been mentioned. We're very happy with the results of last week. 111 states in favor, only 19 states voting no. But one question that I've confronted time and again is why bother? Yes, one of the key features of the General Assembly resolution is that it makes explicit reference to the Security Council and urging it to consider referral to the International Criminal Court. And, as I said, a question I often get is, well, why bother? I think there are a lot of reasons to bother. First of all, I think what we've seen is the prospect of accountability has really galvanized a response by the North Korean regime. I've spoken to a number of diplomats, and I think anyone here would probably agree that we've seen more engagement by North Korea. In fact, I think Sue made this point earlier. We've seen more engagement by North Korea in Geneva and in New York in the last 7 months than we have in the last decade. So clearly they're very sensitive to any criticism of their human rights record, and the fact that they could be potentially held accountable in the International Criminal Court. That was the key pressure point, I think, in the GA. And we saw precisely this in a number of ways in the lead up to the vote of the resolution. First, we had the North Korean regime, potentially dangling the possibility of allowing the special rapporteur for the human rights situation in North Korea to visit the country. This is the first time this offer was made in the, 10 plus years since the mandate was created. Clearly accounted, and in exchange for the deletion of the two key paragraphs in the General Assembly resolution. One, the fact that crimes against humanity were committed pursuant to the highest levels of the state, and second, the fact that the Security Council should consider referral to the ICC. Clearly they care very deeply, not just about their human rights record, but the fact that they could be held accountable for it. So I think that demonstrates why accountability is so important with respect to North Korea. Another question that I've often received, and I'm sure is on everyone's mind, is, well, what's the point? Will China ever allow it? Probably not. And to that I would say, yes, of course, China has an interest in maintaining practical reasons for maintaining the status quo. They don't want a flood of refugees over their border, and they want to maintain the state such that it is. But I would also respond and say that there are factors outside of, the status quo that could actually change their minds. It's not unprecedented that China would allow a referral to the ICC to move forward. We saw that with Darfur, and we saw that with Libya. And, there is a possibility of some external factor. For instance, perhaps another nuclear test. I think we heard at the General Assembly resolution last week, North Korea threatening to conduct another test in response to the passage of the resolution. I'm not an expert on China-North Korea relations, but many have told me, and perhaps Sue or David can speak to this, that the relationship between China and North Korea may be close, but it is not warm. And I think that there may be some possibilities, however potentially remote at this stage, but possibilities, I think, created by the Commission of Inquiry report and possibilities created by raising the political cost of inaction on North Korea that could potentially be used to persuade China down the road to consider ICC referral. Another question that I've had is, even if ICC referral happens, there's no prospect for enforcement. You're looking at a regime that doesn't travel. What's the point of indicting these people if you can't really arrest them tomorrow? Well, I mean, to that I would say, as I said before, North Korea cares very deeply about its reputation. An ICC indictment would really crystallize, I think, the international community's condemnation of the practices that it's engaged in that have resulted in crimes against humanity. It could potentially change the behavior of mid-level perpetrators, for instance, in the camps, to perhaps be less abusive. It could also persuade North Korea, I mean, short of regime change, I mean, that's something that obviously is distasteful to many. I think, that could start the road to changing practices within the country. So it's a shift in policy, a shift in behavior, a managed transition, if you will. But I also think it's just from a point of principle, the question of accountability is essential to send the message that accountability is not going to go away. It may be politically inconvenient, but at the end of the day, we're talking about, potentially hundreds of thousands of victims. They deserve accountability. They deserve justice. And the international community should stand by them. And that's certainly a message we sent to many states in our advocacy in persuading them, trying to persuade them to vote yes for the GA resolution. And that brings me to this current report, which I actually found really helpful. I mean, especially the point about forced labor overseas, because I think it helps put a much needed spotlight on other governments in terms of, so it's not just the focus is not solely on the North Korean regime and its abusive policies, but also those governments that facilitate those repressive policies on which, there may be more traction. I mean, perhaps, as Sue pointed out, not China and Russia immediately, but there are a number of other states that frankly should know better and could be useful to put pressure on them, as the report rightly notes, in the context of the Human Rights Council through the Universal Periodic Review process, and also, the various international labor treaties. I guess I would just add, the focus has been solely on the International Criminal Court and what it can or cannot do. I would say longer term, I know and I think it's right that the immediate focus is really, putting pressure on those states that facilitate this forced labor to change their practices and frankly hit North Korea where it hurts in the pocketbook. This is a valuable source of income. And I see it as being, potentially, as effective as sanctions in a way, because these are relationships that North Korea actually cares about. But over the longer term, I guess it depends on how effective that strategy is in terms of that sort of pressure through these various avenues in Geneva and elsewhere. There are other prospects for criminal justice. One is in those states where, that are facilitating this forced labor, or slavery, essentially. Looking at their criminal justice statutes to see if they have anti-slavery provisions that could be enforced in those countries, or alternatively, or in addition to that, looking at third-party states, either through universal jurisdiction, so it doesn't matter the nationality of either the perpetrator or the victim. Some crimes are just so heinous that, any state can take jurisdiction over prosecuting them, or if those statutes don't exist in third-party states, to look and see where, potential defendants are dual nationals. Because, of course, a state can take jurisdiction over its own nationals if they commit criminal behavior. So that's just something to think about over the much longer term. But in short, I did find the report very helpful and certainly gives us something useful to work with here in New York. I guess I would echo the question that David asked in terms of what your plans are in terms of following up both on the sanctions side, but just generally your broader strategy to, raise the cost for those states who are doing business with North Korea.
Okay.
Thank you.